Here we go, grade 6 on lesson 69, fractions and decimals. Now, yesterday in math, we went from decimals to fractions, and today what we're going to be doing is just doing the opposite, going from fractions back to decimals. So a lot of the same things will apply, but there are a few new things to learn as well. So we're going to start with some pretty easy examples. These are examples of what I like to call look at it fractions. These are fractions that you can just look at and know what the decimal form is based on what we learned yesterday. So yesterday we were talking about how 2/10 is the fraction equivalent of 0.2 because the 2 is in the tenths position. Okay, so because we have a denominator of 10, it's very easy to just look at the fraction and right away know what the decimal is going to be. Same for 45 hundredths, right? All we have to do is just look at that fraction. Because we have a denominator of 100, we know our last number needs to be in the hundredths place. Same for 5/100, that's 5 hundredths. But in this case, we have to make sure that we have a placeholder 0 so that the 5 can be in the hundredths place. And then one more quick example of a look at it fraction. We've got 35/1000, 35 thousandths. So we need to make sure that the last number is in the thousandths place. So if you have fractions with nice denominators like this, multiples of 10, it's very easy to just look at it and write down the decimal. Now, it gets a little bit more complicated when you have fractions that don't necessarily have those nice denominators. But one strategy you can use is you can use equivalent fractions to make the denominators nice. Okay, so what you can do here, let's start with 2/5. 5 is not a multiple of 10, so we can't just look at it and know what the decimal is going to be. But we can very easily change 5 into a nice 10 by multiplying it by 2. And whatever you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top. So we end up with an equivalent fraction of 4/10, or 4/10. Well, now that fraction is a look at it fraction. You just look at it and you know that the 4 has to be in the tenths position. All right, so depending on your fraction, you can look at the different denominators and figure out what you could make, or what denominator you could make it into to make it one of those look at it fractions. Okay, so if you have a denominator, let's say of 20, we have 11/20. Well, if you multiply 20 by 5, so we have to multiply the top by 5 as well, you get a nice 100 on the bottom. So now we have 55 hundredths. So you simply rewrite it as, running out of space. Yep, you can still see 55 with the last number in the hundredths position. All right, 42/200. What we can easily do is take that 200 and actually divide it by 2 to get the nice denominator of 100. So sometimes you can actually even divide to get one of those nice numbers. And we can divide the top by 2 as well. So we end up with 21/100. So then we end up, I'll put it down here because I'm out of space, 0.21 with the 1 in the hundredths position. All right. And then one last quick example. If you see a 25, you can always multiply by 4 to get to 100. So we do 12 hundredths and we end up with 0.12 with a 12 in the hundredths position. Okay, so what you want to do is, if you have certain fractions that don't have one of those nice denominators, do a little bit of thinking. Can I multiply it by something to get a multiple of 10? So like 5, we multiplied by 2 to become 10. 20, you can multiply by 5 to get 100. Or can you divide it, right? 200, we divided by 2 to get 100. So whatever you can do to make one of those nice denominators so it can be like one of those, just look at it fractions, okay? So that's one strategy. Now, You won't always be able to do that. There are some fractions that don't nicely multiply into one of those look at it fractions. Okay, and I guess, well, 1/4 you probably could, but I'll show you this second way to do it. So if you can't think of an equivalent fraction that has one of those nice denominators, 10, 100, 1000, what you can always do is use the division method. So the division method will always work with every fraction. All right, so all you have to do to change a fraction into a decimal with division is take the numerator, so take the top number. Oops, I want a pen. There we go. Take the top number and you divide it by the bottom number, or the denominator. Okay, so 1 divided by 4. Now here you have to remember what we learned in our division unit. When you can't fit the 4 into the 1, so 4 does not go into 1, remember you can add a decimal and then add a 0. And actually we're trying to change this fraction into a decimal, so adding a decimal is a good thing. So now you can think, how many times does 4 go into 10? 4 goes into 10 twice. 2 times 4, you get an 8. Subtract, we've got 2 left. And then remember, you can keep adding zeros. So we add another 0, we bring it down, we've got a 20. How many times does 4 go into 20? 5 times. 5 times 4 is 20. And we end up with a remainder of 0. So now our fraction, 1/4, is equivalent or equal to 0.25. That is the decimal form of it. Let's do one more example just so you can really see how this works. 7/8 doesn't multiply nicely into one of those easy look at it equivalent fractions. So you take the numerator, take your 7, you divide it by 8. 8 can't go into 7, so we need to add a decimal 0. So we add a decimal up there. 8 goes into 78 times. 8 times 8, 64. Do our subtraction. We get a 6. Oh, my pen is really not working. Bring it down. 8 goes into 67 times. Maybe I'll just switch to my finger. Usually I'm kind of messy with my finger, so bear with me here. So 7 times 8, we get a 56. We do our subtraction again. 4. Bring down another 0. 8 goes into 45 times, and that goes nice and evenly. We end up with a 40 and a remainder of 0. So 7/8, the decimal equivalent is 0.875. Okay, so no matter what, the division will always work no matter what your fraction is. Even if I were to take one of these look at it fractions, so this first one up here, and I were to do 2 divided by 10, you would end up with 0.2. Okay, so even if the equivalent fraction method doesn't really work, division will always work. So keep that in mind as you do your work. Also, there are a few questions in your exercises that you're going to have to do today where it says to use a calculator, but I've given you some specific instructions in your team's assignment. You are not to use a calculator. You're to use one of these methods that I just taught you. So make sure you're really paying attention to those instructions so that you do it correctly. And that's it for today. Let me know, as always, if you have any questions.